Welcome to the Parable Arrows podcast, where we wrestle with story to seek deeper truth. We believe that engaging with the art of the world can help us discern more of what God, as the true artist, is trying to reveal in the beauty of his story. Join us as we discuss movies, ideas, and practice engaging with art, God's word, our thoughts, and each other. Hey everyone, this is Femi and Josh coming at you again with another episode. I want to ask Josh, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. I feel like we've been gone for a while and we've been radio silent on some of our channels as to why. So I forgot to put it on our outline, but for fans, go check out our YouTube channel. Our presentations that we did at Eastbrook Church and High Point Church are up and live. So if you weren't able to make it in person, you can check those out. And we've also kind of been radio silent because we've been doing some big planning, but we're not going to say too much on that. But some big things are afoot and we're very excited about it.
You know, it's work in progress. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we are coming back again to discuss another film. And this film is based on a book, so you might be familiar with the book. But our subject today is Ender's Game. It's a slightly political season here, stateside. We just got out of an election.
Slightly political is the understatement of the year.
For our vast international audience, all of you in Australia, we understand that you were waiting to hear with bated breath. But one of the key elements in a political situation and a story is who are you going to believe? Which solution will you believe? And so we focus on this movie based on Orson Scott Card's book. And we follow this boy's journey from a threatened earthly population and what happens when he potentially becomes a mass murderer in the span, film-wise, of a few hours. Do we know what's going on? What is the truth? What he should believe? What will we believe in our own experiences in the same way? So no better person than Josh to sort of explore this with, dig down into this. And so we'll explore the ideas of the narratives, the ethics and complexity of some of those solutions. And for our new listeners, we use this model called SMART, where we look at the summary of the movie, the story, the message, the audience, and then we rethink and then use scripture to help us and then use a touch of theology in the end. So let's get into it. All right, so we start off with the summary. Andrew Ender Wiggin is trained at a school where, although he is not the physically strongest person, his tactical skills are far superior to all of his classmates. We find out he's the third of his siblings to go through this school, and the school specifically picks children with tactical knowledge to win a war against this alien enemy, the Formics. The Formics almost destroyed Earth, and the school trains the best minds to prepare for the next attack. His older brother was too violent and aggressive. His sister was too benevolent and passive. After impressing the lead commanders and the surveillance of the school, he's given the final test. He's told that he's flunked out. It's a test to make sure before he's transferred to a space school where the training gets more intense that he knows how to deal with failure. They've learned the entire life about the sacrifice of this person named Mazer Rackham, who flew the lead ship into the Formic fleet and exterminated it. Ender is also isolated while he's in this program where he has to learn how to gain the trust of his fellow students who've been there before him and the students he's arrived with. The competitive nature of the program sees Ender's skills thrive. He gets promoted fast, then climbs and joins a new team. He rises in that team, even with a confrontational leader, and then gets his own team. Then they practice and drill until there's a final strategy where Ender has to face multiple teams, and he still wins. A small tragedy occurs after that because a student, a former team member of his named Bonzo, jealously finds Ender in the bathroom and tries to attack him, where Ender defends himself, and Bonzo ends up falling and going functionally brain dead. He's racked with guilt and given the opportunity to return to Earth to be with his family. While he's on Earth, the lead teacher and the commander are split if he's ready for this battle or if he's too conflicted and sensitive like his sister. When he returns, he's not just going to a space school, he's going further into an outpost where he meets Mazer Rackham. Now, Mazer was thought to be dead, but he realizes it's all a big secret. He's training other people to fight the Formics further out in deep space. In the final test, after a bunch of more training, we receive that Ender takes a new assembled team from teammates that he had with Victory in the past in different simulations, and they go against this Formic in one final simulation test. Then he learns that the simulation test was actually real. They traveled way further into space to be to the Formic home, a secondary base, and attack. And that led to a genocide. It wiped out an entire species. All these children that were trained in this military strategy were never informed that they were actually controlling real soldiers, real pilots, real space people in sacrificial maneuvers. Real soldiers sacrifice for Ender's strategy and a victory, but at what cost? And he's racked with guilt and lashes out. At the end of the film, we see Ender get a vision from the Formic Queen. He's been thinking like the enemy and finds that there is a home where there's one last egg, and that egg she's been protecting. So he travels, racked with his remorse for his actions, and takes the egg and the new queen and leaves to find a planet for her to start a new colony. So hopefully that was confusing enough, but let's go get into the message and we'll get to the audience rethink. Okay, so Josh, what do we think the message of the movie version of Ender's Game is?
Yeah. So of the many messages, because I read through yours and I definitely agree, I was really captivated by the similarities in this to things like Jojo Rabbit, which we've talked about, where Jojo Rabbit's a more surrealist, extreme version, with the influential adult character being imaginary Hitler, but with Ender's Game having Graf as this kind of voice of like, do this, and guidance, and seeing these things in Ender, I think my takeaway was that what we build the confidence or the trust of young people on can either strengthen them or eventually destroy them. So we have Graf, who builds up Ender around this idea of you're this amazing general, you have this great mind, like all these true things, but then he manipulates him into buying into these situations that then when, you get to everything being unfolded and the curtain being pulled back, it was all kind of a lie to accomplish a goal that Ender wasn't even fully on board with to begin with. And so, yeah, that fact that reality, everything kind of collapses. We see him screaming at Graf after the final simulation and him just being like, I don't know what to do and stuff like that. So more to say on that, but that'll probably come later. So how about you? What was one of your takeaways?
Yeah. One of my 3 sort of takeaways was the systems around you both work with complexity and simplicity to try to drive your action. Making things that seem complex can make them seem well thought out. Making things seem simple can also hide some of the deeper complexity and nuance. Second one was a person with clarity in war must have tactical skills, the ability to be aggressive, and the ability to be compassionate. And the third one was there's sometimes a right thing to do even in a war where there's so much at stake. So those were some of the messages I took. And in terms of agreement, I think that's one of the hard parts of Ender's Game, because he's thrust into a paradigm where all of this stuff is already happening as a child. He doesn't get to go back in time and actually see Mazer Rackham and the lie of the sacrifice. He doesn't get to see what's going on or do it. He's sort of thrust into this system and then has to make these decisions as he proceeds. And it's another thing where we discuss like how fundamentally fear is an aspect of the entire population's action. So it makes it hard to go, oh yeah, I agree. But it is a factor where like if you're using fear as a thing to drive all of this action and this behavior and this thought, it's suspect. I'll just keep it there until we get into some more discussion.
Yeah,
suspect.
Definitely.
But what about you? Do you think about that with the confidence, the message of how you build up a young person's confidence?
Yeah, my little blurb was just realizing over the last couple of years that I think that's been kind of a chip on my shoulder is I think each generation kind of has its own world that it grew up in. And I think then what they do is they turn around, they're like, all right, kids, get ready. This is the world that you're going to inherit. And then by the time kids are even semi starting to see those pieces fall into place, they're like, that's not true at all. And then I think there's this disillusionment of, okay, you're telling me that this matters, but this matters. And you're telling me I should do this, but this, and like everything starts to not make sense. And so then instead of just being truthful of like, well, this is where I came from. This is what I went through. This is the world that I had. Here are some things that I'm seeing on the horizon for your world. Here are some transferable things from my era to your era, but there are going to be some things you're going to have to figure out in real time. If we just like sell it as like, but this is how it is and you should do this. I don't think it leaves room for, someone who is younger to kind of step into the world that they're in and to kind of like observe it themselves and kind of piece some things together with guidance that is trustworthy. But yeah, to your message, I'm curious too of like, the whole fear driving thing. Like to your point at the beginning, the political season, that was something that was grating on me from both sides. And so I'm curious, like for you, some more details on like, if you agree and, why you think this is important discussion on fear.
Yeah. I think it ties to your message on the confidence thing. When you're trying to give somebody coming up after you something, you want to try to avoid the mistakes that you've made in your past. You want them to miss the pitfalls that you fell into. So you will sometimes make something that is more complex seem more simple. And fear is one of the ways to make things, in my experience, seem like an easier decision. If I can make you afraid of an outcome, make you afraid of a certain decision outcome, then you're more likely to act in the opposite or even defend the position that I take. And so sometimes I'll make it seem really complex, or sometimes I'll make it seem really simple. And with kids, we try to make things as simple as possible. That means we cover up a lot of nuance to the point. It's not necessarily right where you have a kid think, oh, my parents or my adults around me in my life lied to me, because I don't think their intention. They want you to be safe. They want you to be successful. They want you to be happy. They want you to do what they have come to a conclusion of is right. But because of that complexity and people's impatience, which we can get into that, the impatience around certain things, I think that we end up doing things that are accidentally very manipulative, and that becomes a danger. And I think the movie is trying to call into effect that when it comes to Ender's Commander Graph, trying to push him and push him and push him and push him faster, 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 harder, harder, harder. Obviously, for a movie, it's really quick. For your life, you'll be done, and if you start in the afternoon, you'll be done by the evening. But that over the course of months or years, how we think about the end of I need to do this, otherwise things aren't going to be good. Do you, or is that a fear that you have? Right. And that can get into how Christians deal with outcomes, which is something we will discuss a little bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's hard to be like, oh yeah, I 100% agree with these messages. It's just sort of like, oh yeah, this is not smooth as a baby bottom. It is a little hairy.
More like a,
so
yeah.
We're gonna go ahead, go for it.
I was like, no, I'll leave it there.
All right. So we'll pop into audience and then rethink it right after this. Okay, Josh, who do you think should watch Ender's Game? The Asa Butterfield version, Harrison Ford, Viola Davis.
Yeah. I think families with kids, I think especially because so much of the cast is even seemingly like late middle school to high school age kids, I think this is a really good, like, how do these kids fit into this scenario? So I think, and two, the fact that you kind of have what we could say is a situation where the adults maybe make a more clear mistake in the manipulation and the kids are kind of acting on innocence, I think that could be a really powerful discussion in families about, okay, like obviously we're your parents, we're trying to guide you the best that we can, and like we're going to be truthful to you, but there are people, and sometimes maybe even us and our sinfulness, that will cause you to see things inaccurately, and we don't necessarily want that. So like, just opening the door to have those kinds of talks. I think Friends definitely, like it's a sci-fi movie. If there's book nerds out there who've seen or read the book before seeing the movie, I'm sure that there's some crossover or like nuance that gets added that would probably be interesting for discussions. And then evangelistically, I think especially if you focus or guide the discussion around something like fear, like how does fear drive you? How does it impact your decision making? Who in your life has the most fearful voice that actually influences you? I think those are all really interesting questions to kind of put like a name and a face to. So yeah, I would say all audiences, it'd probably go well. I think there's enough depth with the whole like war and morality thing that it's probably not for like little kids. There's nothing really crazy in it, but it's just a little bit too dense maybe for a younger audience to maybe like really understand the themes.
I agree. The scene with Bonzo and like the accident after he attacks Ender, like that's pretty heavy to sit with, especially with it being a very clear in its depiction episode of self-defense. But I would agree as well that there's some kids who could potentially watch this in a way for parents to talk about humility. With Friends, it really just makes, it's really a decision about if your friend group wants to see it or not. The other element to speaking with like truth and fear is there are a lot of people who are in their late 20s and up to early 40s who are deconstructing or have deconstructed their faith based off of an outcome where they think something is simple when it's really complex, or something is complex when it's really simple. And our emotions get in the way. And I think that this could be a really good sort of fair ground to say, yes, it's true that you heard some things were simple when you were growing up in the faith that are more complex than that. And some things that are extremely complex can be brought down and more simple. But that doesn't mean that the faith is not telling you the truth. Similarly, on the arguments where you have against the faith, sometimes you're trying to make something complex really simple, and sometimes you're trying to make something really simple complex. And that manipulation of us in our quote unquote modern sophistication is a damaging thing that could really help sort of even the playing field of like, hey, we know what manipulation is. We need to be honest about that has happened and is happening in more than one way. It's not just to control you. And in the United States specifically, where we have a culture where people want to be independent and make their own decisions, I think that it's really important to realize you're not always making those decisions in a vacuum and being emotionally stoic about the way you're logically processing it. You're coming with some premises and prejudices that impact it. And admitting it can be just much more freeing in having the discussion. So I think this could help with that as a sort of slow uptick precursor, especially for that high school age. Like, I don't know what I think about, take your pick, baptism, Christian involvement in politics, how we do the Lord's Supper, whether or not I believe in youth group is the way that we function, and what my teacher said at school, like all those questions. This can be a really fair playing ground to go like, yeah, that's fair. Also, as we talk through audience, we can go straight into our rethink section, where the first question that I had was, isn't it interesting and humbling that we recognize in the film it is the sacrifice, air quotes, of Mazer Rackham as the inciting event to completely transform the way the world is organized around this military action? And my question would be, what is the difference in the pivotal sacrifice of Jesus compared to the fictional Rackham in your mind?
Yeah, so a quote that I think this whole movie hinged on for the message. Like I tend to kind of filter films like this through, okay, like we're watching all these things play out, and maybe it's like one line that someone says that all of a sudden, I go, oh, that's what they're getting at, or like
That
that's
sticks
a
with you.
element that sticks with me. And so for me, what that line was is right after the final simulation, Ender runs out. He's like looking like he's going to be sick. He's clearly in major distress. Graf comes out, and they're kind of having a verbal back and forth. And Graf says, he says to Ender, "We won. That's all that matters." And Ender's response is, "No, the way we win matters." And so I think something that's interesting to me is in the gospel, when you have Christ sacrificing himself, and you even have to this very day people being like, this is fake, it's not real, this didn't really happen. There's kind of this challenge of its validity. And I think the idea that being true, and that being like a victory that Jesus, we like, that's the word we use all the time in church culture, is like Christ's victory on the cross or whatever. And it was meant to be seen. It was not hidden. It was not like Christ dying on the cross was not this thing that was like, we can't let everyone know that our God got executed by the state. Like it was like on full display, and it was intended to be on full display, that this is what's happening, and this is why it matters. Versus Rackham, his sacrifice was meant to be seen a certain way to get everyone on board for a lie, which I think is really interesting. So I don't really have any more thoughts beyond that. I'm still kind of processing, because I think that's a great question, but that was kind of my gut reaction. Is Christ's sacrifice was in public display, and it was humiliating, it was awful, and history changing. And then you have Rackham's sacrifice, which was shrouded in deceit and manipulation, and the consequences that will probably inevitably happen. I'm sure. Did he ever write a sequel to this book?
Yeah, I think that was part of the challenge, is like, how do you write all of this stuff?
Yeah.
And it's based off of, I think, Isaac Asimov as a writer, and like his Foundation series. There's a lot of good sci-fi philosophy mix. So, but there's some continuation of Ender that goes on. So
got it. So after seeing the movie, I'd be really interested to see the consequences of Ender's decision to go and to get the egg from the queen and stuff like that. Because if this Rackham sacrifice basically led to this conflict continuing, and not even because it needs to continue, but because, that question is like, how do you know they're all gone? How do you know that they're all dead? From Ender to Graf. And he's like, you just destroyed the whole planet. Like, of course there's none left. It's like, oh, they might be in for some trouble. So, but when you were framing up this question, like what was running through your mind, or what did you see as differences between those two?
Yeah, I think the differences you touched on a little bit, in terms of the secrecy and the honesty in comparison. Mazer Rackham's was used as a news to inspire like military schools for kids, where we should be very cautious of that as Christians, of what we're trying to do and how we build up what we call Christian soldiers, because our king in his sacrifice was a different way to win, as people call it a lot of the time, the upside down kingdom. It's not the same as Mazer Rackham's sacrifice was used. The other thing is that it was a sacrifice for both that instilled all this activity and incited all this activity. Because Mazer Rackham died, we need to honor this sacrifice. Because Jesus died, how do we honor his sacrifice? It's a very similar question, even though the two sacrifices were very different, and the outcomes were different, and the purposes were different. That we understand. We'll use the election again as an example. when someone is sacrificing being able to live a comfortable life because they want to help the country. That's how a side might talk about their candidate, right? Like they could just go off into the sunset and become a multimillionaire and just chill and relax, but they're sacrificing their free time to serve the country. We should support them. Mazer Rackham's sacrifice, so we should support Jesus' sacrifice. It is how Christ in his perfect sacrifice is now even used in different methods to help people understand, like, and influence, and I will just straight up say manipulate people.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's millions and billions of dollars to have a space program for kids.
Yeah.
You know, like,
Yeah.
it's somebody has to believe, and you need a system to believe in. And saying, hey, this candidate sacrificing for you, please donate your hard-earned money. Please donate your time to go knock on doors for this candidate because they're sacrificing for you. Well, we're saying as Christians, in not too different way, like, give your life up, become a living sacrifice because of what Christ did. And to see how people manipulate that is the thing I had in the question and my thought of, oh man, that's touchy.
Mm-hmm.
So,
dude, for real, I'm with you on that.
Yeah. So the second question, and you sort of alluded to it in your purpose, was what in faith was the biggest switch up in how you thought life would work and the reality of life as you experience it. And sort of a fast follow is, what's the current thing that God is helping you see differently that you might have thought of as a kid that you're now going, oh, this is who he is and how he is beautiful and what he is doing, that you might not have seen when you were younger.
Yeah. Oh boy, it's about to get probably decently
We're recording
real
in the morning today, so if you get emotional in the morning, that's okay, you know.
No, it's fine. It's good. I don't think it'll get to that level, but I'm just like running through all the examples that came to my head, and I was like, oof, those are some big ones. Just totally fine. But where to start? I think one of the first things that I kind of felt disillusioned by was in like growing up, and it's kind of ironic being back at the school that I grew up in. And this wasn't necessarily a direct message that someone literally to my face said, this is what matters, this is what doesn't matter, this is what you should do, this is what you shouldn't do. But you got the sense subliminally by what people celebrated, what was more important. And the things that seemed to be more important to the school at the time were high academic achievement, getting into prestigious colleges, getting a lot of scholarship money, getting degrees, and majoring in things that were most people objectively would say are like, I don't know what the right word would be. Like the difference between getting like a bachelor arts English degree, which is what I got, and a degree of engineering in biomedical stuff, or even civil or chemical or something like that. Yeah. So I think from that, when I went into college, I had this view of needing to suppress what I was sensing I was good at and what I maybe wanted to do, and maybe now with clarity over the years, what God had designed me to do. And I had kind of received this message, intentionally or unintentionally, that I needed to fight against that because that wasn't good and that wasn't valuable and that wasn't what was needed. And that wasn't what was going to create a comfortable or healthy life for me in the future. And so when I got to college, I fought really hard to stay in engineering, which is what I originally went to UW to do. And I hated it. I hated every second of it. I hated the math. I hated the frameworks that you had to work in engineering. Like it felt like the antithesis to who I was, and I couldn't take it. But I was like, but I at least for my first 2 semesters, I was like, but I got to fight through this because this is it. This is what I'm supposed to do. This is what is supposed to be the thing that I majoring and all that stuff. And long story short, I ended up basically getting dropped from UW-Madison over Christmas break my sophomore year because I was on probation and I was stuck in the engineering school and I couldn't figure out what to do. And it was a really painful process that I feel like...
Academic probation. Right.
Academic, yeah.
Not legal.
No, yeah. Stole a car. It was academic probation, and because of my grades and just really struggling with being in engineering and not being good at it and all this stuff. And then it was over Christmas break my sophomore year. I got the notice. I realized I found it in a journal where I have a journal from that era where it was before I took my last chem exam, my second semester freshman year. And I was standing in my dorm room and I wrote it out. I was like, God, if I'm not supposed to do engineering, I really, really, really need a sign. And my grades, when I got my grades back in the summer, I had taken 3 courses. So I was one of those like underworkers in college. I did not take like 15, 18 credit semesters. Like I was like bare minimum. I got 2 D's and like a B that semester. And both of the D's were in my engineering courses that I needed. And they weren't even like real big boy engineering courses. They were like Chem 100 or something like that. So I was like, this is a bad sign. But I think I felt really stuck because the messages I was receiving from my life experience and from me and from who I was were, this isn't the right path for you. The messages I was hearing echo in my brain from well-intentioned people was, you need to fight through all those things that you think that you're seeing because you can't trust that. That's not real. Or like, you just need to suppress that and push that away. And so I think that led to a lot of frustration over many years of just being like, okay, so then from that era of life, what else wasn't true? What else was I told that actually wasn't healthy? What else was I told to care about and value that maybe I don't need to care about and value? So I didn't necessarily go through like a spiritual deconstruction during that phase, but I felt like I went through like an American culture / like
value
being a human being. Like values deconstruction in that phase where I just was like, I feel like I was sold a whole load of booty and like big hairy booty. And I don't know what to do with that. So I think something that God is to that, and that's just like one of the big ones, but not to take up our whole time. I'll kind of move on. I think how God has been changing how I see him in this is just how deeply intentional he is and how he creates people, and specifically in their individuality to fit into a larger picture. And I think as I've studied scripture, that's kind of what's made me forgive, but also feel kind of burned by the past is, like when you read, I think it's 1 Corinthians about, or is it something? I think it's 2 Corinthians about the body, one body, many parts, and how Paul writes this really weird, but just amazing analogy that if, the eyes start telling the feet, like, I don't need you, you're not valuable. Or if the feet start telling, the head, like, I don't need you, you're not valuable. Well, then you have a dumb body and like, it doesn't work properly. And so I think that's been restorative to me, that I feel like God's been kind of being like, okay, dude, yeah, you probably did hear that message and there's still some work to undig that from your psyche. But remember, like, I have designed a very complex body, and complex bodies need multiple kinds of people. And so if you're this kind of person and you've seen evidence of being this kind of person, I probably did that on purpose, and you don't need to suppress that. So yeah, so that's one scenario. But for you, because you're a couple years ahead of me in terms of like life and age, and even just, having a family, having kids, like, what has been your biggest faith shakeup in like seeing the world and stuff like that?
It's not too different, actually. So I did study bioengineering and stayed with it, but I think that I was doing it because I had the competency to do it, not because I had a passion for it. And the value switch up was trying to separate what we have conflated. This is one of those complexity simplicity things where there is economic value, there is good. right? So doctor, lawyer, engineer. There's a joke. For those of you who don't know, I'm Nigerian American, and the joke is you're either a doctor, lawyer, engineer, or a disappointment.
Gosh,
I
that's
am
so
not
dark.
a doctor, lawyer, engineer. And my friends who are like first and second generation children of immigrants, they also sort of be like, yeah, man, I like, and it's not because that's where parents value you. It's where they know that there's like some safety and stability.
Yeah.
And if you can do well there, you're going to be able to afford a house. You're going to be able to like be well respected. You're going to have to dress cleanly and talk well and be in, good society. And nobody can really take those things away from you, right? Like it's hard to take away someone's law degree. It's hard to take someone's medical degree away if they've worked for it and earned it, even if they don't want it. They're a doctor, they're a lawyer, they're an engineer. Like it's hard. And thinking that when I didn't love some of the work of it, I think it was in my junior year of how long the one element of research I wanted to do was going to take. The professor I was talking to said it'll be like 21 years, like 20 years of research on that. That would be really good. I was like, so until I'm in my 40s, like, what am I supposed to do until I figure this out? Like, 40 years old is when this will matter. Like, was hoping we could do this in like 9 months. I could publish an article and be out of here. And God was like, hey, there are other gifts that you have. Like, you're competent here, but there's other gifts that you have. And I was like, oh yeah, I have a lot of other gifts. If I applied myself in all of these ways, like that could be it. What makes me different from other people in a way that is beneficial to those around me? And trying to parse that out, I think, is partially what God is currently helping me figure out. Of yes, you can speak okay, you can write okay, you can talk okay, you think pretty well, you can do math, you can do science, you can do business stuff, you can learn. All of that's great. You're a father, you're a husband. Great. Those are not the things that I have for you. That's not your calling. Your calling is to go deeper than that into how I have made you. And recently, talking with a couple guys as they're growing. They've humbly asked, like, "Hey, will you mentor me here and there?" So I was like, let's just go through some discipleship as a group. And being a gift recipient as an identity former, don't form your identity based off of what you do, because that as soon as you lose a hand or an eye, then your identity is broken. If it's based off of what you do, which I think we misinterpret that in faith. It's simple for kids, a lot of able-bodied kids. It's simple to be like school, college, work, family, do, because we are thinking about Christ's action. But thinking about Christ's identity, and therefore my identity as a gift recipient of salvation, as a broken king who's now been given the gift of salvation, that identity formation goes, okay, well, what will I do as a gift recipient? And I think that that's what God is changing in me right now of, oh, that's a different paradigm to think about it. Not I have to do something like more creative or I have to do something more intellectual. It's I have a gift of salvation. How do I want to use that gift? And that identity as a gift recipient will now change how I hopefully speak to my wife and my kids, my coworkers. And if something changes where I have a different job, I'm still a gift recipient. That doesn't change based off of those circumstances. So trying to pass that to other people is probably something that was taught and sort of relearned in terms of simplicity and complexity and all the mix of that. So, but yeah, we can talk about that for a long time. But that's something we would definitely encourage you listeners to think through of, especially if you're an adult, what's sort of switched and what God is actually teaching you now that's clarifying things like Ender. It's a lot of shock that he went through. Speaking of shock, the third question was about Bonzo. So Bonzo is one of Ender's. He's promoted through the Space Cadet program. One of his former commanders, and he's sort of mean, aggressive, like wants to tactically take things, no loss whatsoever. When Ender beats this sort of multi-group, Bonzo attacks him and ends up going brain dead because Ender defends himself. Ender doesn't seem to be questioning anymore if the Formics are a threat or not. He's not worried about if they're a threat or not. He's thinking about the right thing to do. And in these ideas of what we're learning about ourselves and how God is changing it, like the right thing to do is a big question. And so in the idea of political issues, poor groupings, and by parties of supporters, I personally, to be honest with people, I vote purple a lot of the time, mix of Republican and Democrat, because I don't want either side to get their way fully without having to compromise in some things and to work. Other Christians vote Democrat all the way or Republican all the way. So, Josh, my question is, with all of that, with all that changing, what do you think biblically about doing the right thing? Not whether something is a threat or not, but doing the right thing when so much is at stake.
Oh, homie, this is oh man. How honest do I want to be?
Well, what's the right thing?
Yeah. Okay, I will be fully honest. So if this gets me canceled in the future, whatever, it's fine. I did not vote this year. I voted of the 4 elections that I've been eligible to vote in, I have only voted in 2 of them. The first one I voted Republican. The second one I did not vote at all. The third one I voted Democrat, and then this one I did not vote at all. So if you're keeping track of the math, you'll be able to parse out who is for what and at what points. And as I've gone over those years of just thinking through the political process and stuff, and that question of what's the right thing, what's been interesting is the timing of me teaching our 10th graders at school about politicized Christianity through the book Death to Deconstruction by Josh S. Porter, which I highly, highly, highly recommend. If you want to talk about a really good, like, challenge your faith, grow, wrestle with complex topics, Josh S. Porter, Death to Deconstruction, excellent book. But he has these 5 great predators that he labels as the main reason that people walk away from the faith. And like the second or third one is politicized Christianity, that politics gets interwoven into faith and salvation and all this stuff. And so he starts making crazy statements, like if you're this side, you're the devil. And if you're this side, you're good or whatever. And we study 1 Samuel 8, which is, as I've retooled it in my brain, the first Democratic vote. And the first Democratic vote was between God and a human. And the right thing to do in that moment was for the human voters to say, you know what? We really want this thing. We want this human king, which I've kind of inferred. I don't think it's necessarily in the text, but I've inferred that it's because God is not movable. He's not manipulatable. He is not purchasable, but a human king is. A human king is purchasable. A human king can be swayed by humans. And so why wouldn't we want that leading the way if that's going to allow us to influence what we can and can't do, and we can, say what is and is not right based on what we want and who we put into power and all that stuff. And you have Samuel being like, dudes, you don't want this. Don't do this. This isn't a good idea. And God's like, no, give them what they want. This is the Democratic vote. They voted. This is what they want. Vote. He's like, but let them know when they vote for this, this is what's going to happen. And then you get Saul, and that's what happens. And so I've just been really struggling with my identity as an American and the gift that it is to vote and the gift that it is to be a part of the political process, especially in a world where there still are dictators and people where oppressive regimes reign, and there is no ability to have your voice heard in that way by saying, this is who I want to be in this position. And even if they don't win, it's like, okay, well, I got to cast my ballot and see what happens. But I think in the same way to Ender's Game, there's this illusion of how much influence I feel like my voice has through this method versus like I just wonder how many people who were spending money and time and energy. Like I was seeing some of the absolutely crazy numbers by celebrities on both sides that were spent on campaigning. It's gross. Like it's insane. And so there's part of me where I'm like, you're telling me you couldn't have funneled that into like a homeless shelter in a couple different states? Like you're telling me you couldn't have
fixing one of the problems
hired people.
says.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like you're telling me you couldn't have used all that money to like start an organization that would actually fix some of these problems that you're campaigning for. Like
I'm Batman.
Yeah, it's like so like that like really bothers me. Like that bothers me that I'm being encouraged to vote, which again, I see as a huge gift. But then the impact of that vote is to put another person who other people have spent millions of dollars to say is the best person when they're, and then I like turn around and I'm like, oh, but that person's still not fed, and that organization is still in shambles, and that thing is still, and you're like, what was the point of that? Like it's so I've been wrestling with that. So that is me being as fully honest and real about the political process to me. So
yeah, I think that's fair. I think that the and I said for the I'm Batman thing because people are like, well, why doesn't Bruce Wayne just fix stuff if he's got so much money? Speak less of Batman. Why can't Bruce Wayne do some stuff?
That's a really good question.
Like, why does Arkham keep on having people break out? Can't Bruce Wayne just fund Arkham to be better? Like that type of thing. I think that we do focus on outcome a lot and what's going to happen, and doing the right thing is not actually tied to the outcome. I think the outcome can make something seem right or not. For instance, if I tell somebody the truth and say, hey, I really didn't like your speech, right? And they receive it well, people will be like, clap, clap, clap. You did the right thing by telling the truth. If I tell someone, hey, I didn't like your speech, and they go on a rampage and they're upset, somebody could go, well, you shouldn't have told them that. Mm-hmm. You shouldn't have told them this way. You could have done it this way. And it makes the action of telling the truth suspect rather than the outcome of telling the truth. Now, some people manipulate that to go, I should tell the truth, therefore I should tell the truth all the time. And it doesn't matter what people feel because it doesn't matter about the outcome. That's not quite true either. The right thing is you're trying to convey a message to a person, not being a black and white, I must say exactly what I think, or this person needs to hear this now. I think we talked about this before, but Simon Sinek, who's more of a business writer and like humanist type person, he talked about the fact that he had a friend who was in a play and did horrible in the play. And she met him right afterwards. It's like, so what did you think? And he was like, I don't want to lie, but the play was horrible. And so he said to her, I'm so proud of you. You look like you had such a good time. You put so much work into this. I hope you feel amazing. Right? Like something along those lines. Did not lie. Said things that were honest, that were true. But she's on this super high right after this. A couple of days later, he messaged her like, hey, I wanted to talk to you about your play and give some feedback on some things that I thought about. And she had come down from the high and was ready to receive it. Not all the time are we going to get a clear understanding of when someone's going to be able to receive something, but that informs whether or not we tell the truth. And that's one example. But the right thing is not based on the outcome, and it's not based on this philosophical aspect of the right thing. It's the core of what makes the thing right. I want to get a message across to a person, right? I think with politics and with Ender and the Formics, he's not going, I don't want to protect Earth, or I want to destroy the Formics, or I want to protect. He's like, in this moment, I have to defend myself. Oh, snap. I did the right thing in defending myself, but now this negative thing happened. Was that still right? You know? Where with the Formics, he's very clear of, they were not going to attack us. You taught me that they were, and that these were simulations. You lied. If you told me they could attack us and we needed to do simulations, and we did do simulations, I would feel so much different, but you lied. because you were trying to destroy them. That is something where, like, I think my answer right now to the question is, what is the actual thing you were trying to do? Not what is at stake and what's going to then be the outcome, or how can I feel absolved of guilt, which is where we usually go with our prudence and diligence processes. But what is the thing I'm actually trying to do, right? What I'm actually trying to do politically. And we can get into, marriage, divorce, abortion, school, education, like gender, like people's feelings, all those other things are questions. But like, what are you actually trying to do? Not the policy, not the outcome. And I think that becomes it's one of those things we try to make simple that's really more complex. And my answer of what's the right thing you're trying to do seems more simple, but it is very complex. But yeah, that's where everyone's going to it. So I appreciate your honesty, because it is one of those things where you're trying to really wrestle with it. Israel means wrestle with God, and you're trying to wrestle with it. And we tell people wrestle with story, and this is a story we're wrestling with. So
yeah,
think about that for yourself. Listeners, please give us feedback. Last thing, a little more about sin. Annihilation of a threat in terms of the formics is not that different from mortification or the killing of the flesh, the ruthless elimination of a sin in our life. We dealt with a threat like this when we talked about Arrival. Let's get rid of the aliens. And the word also seems to draw a parallel with the precision of the written word. Like, it's the word of the Lord, sharper than any two-edged sword, separating bone from marrow when it comes to our own life. So what do you think about how aggressive we are with a given threat? What lessons do you take from the Bible, cultural examples about how aggressive we are with a threat?
Yeah, I think threat is such an interesting word, because we're in this weird climate right now where questions are threatening, or even having discussions are threatening. And when you conflate curiosity or certain things that maybe should not be labeled as a threat as dangerous, which is what a threat is, it makes people unwilling to do that thing, or it makes people want to squash it. And so I think it depends on what the threat is attacking. So thinking from the Christian side, I think one of the reasons that this language of, destroying your flesh and death and rebirth and all this stuff is so hard for people to grasp is because, to your point a second ago, depending on where we start this process, if I see comfort, like, I don't see a comfort I have as a threat. I see things attacking my comfort as the threat. That might be the actual problem. That my comfort in my self-medicating my anxiety, through different addictions is, well, I need to protect that, because the threat is all this stuff that's trying to ramp me up and blah, 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 and all this stuff. Or if I see, to the political season, this one candidate needs to win because I can't handle if they don't. That's a comfort. And that's the threat, is that it's not going to happen, or the outcome isn't going to happen. But the actual danger is the comfort that is driving you to see things incorrectly. And so I've really wondered that of how many things in our daily lives have we labeled as threatening that are actually or essential, that the gospel through God's Spirit is trying to challenge us. You've labeled everything threatening incorrectly, and you need to redefine some things if you really want to fight the right fight. And I mean, that's all throughout Scripture, right? That it's like, our war is not against flesh and blood, it's against powers and principalities. And, you put the drop in here of separating bone and marrow. It's really razor tight. It's not a the word is not given a
as
chainsaw
a
analogy. Yeah, or a hammer. Yeah, it's a scalpel. And so I'm curious what you think on that idea of us as modern believers needing to re-challenge the term threat and what is actually a threat in our life in relation to sin.
Yeah, this is something that I've had like maybe 5-6 years ago. I thought of this because I was thinking of getting a tattoo, and want things to be meaningful. But the word resilience versus resistance, and how you build resilience coming from like to bounce back or to be able to bounce back from something. When a threat is outside of you, you can't really control what it's gonna do. You can only control how resilient you are, how prepared you are to take it on, and when it attacks, how you bounce back. If you go out and annihilate the threat, right, you're going to have to annihilate a lot of threats because there's a lot of threats outside of you. Yes, to your comfort, but just in general, there's just threats everywhere. If you're thinking about inside you, where it seems that Jesus wants us to focus more, is there's a huge threat inside you. If you're not killing the sin inside you, other quotes are like the human heart is a factory of idols. Be killing sin, or sin will be killing you. Like, I'm not that violent with myself. Why am I that violent with somebody else? I'm like a surgeon with myself. Oh, it's just this section that I need to cut out right now, that I need to heal. Then I'm going to cut out this section and cut out this section. It seems that whether the sin is internal or external, it changes. With the internal sin, we can actually be resistant and like firm. One, by the power of the Holy Spirit. Two, that's not a physical battle that I'm fighting all the time. It is that internal resistant battle of where I have the Spirit fighting for me, like resisting me. There's no aggression to other people. There's no thing going on. I have to fight this sin inside me. And if I'm aggressive with the sin inside me, I am even more resilient to the sin outside of me.
Mm-hmm.
And so this idea of resistance and resilience with sin, when I'm attacking somebody else externally, what we teach our kids with hitting is like, hey, you can only hit to defend yourself or to defend somebody else. That's it. There's no like external proactive aggression towards a threat. If that threat's threatening somebody else, you protect them. Now, that can also be twisted depending on what box you want to draw around an issue. But I think that is part of where I am right now with how much force I put towards a threat. Is I need to really fight my sin aggressively. That's where I'm the most aggressive, and where it's mortification, like kill it, beat it down, nail it down. Where it's external to me, I can't be doing both well, killing stuff outside of me and killing stuff inside of me. I have to put that energy somewhere. And if I'm really focused on like, Josh, you sin, I need it, blah, 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 at you, I'm forgetting my own. And I think we're supposed to focus on our own first and work on those weaknesses, which if we play that out in the movie, Graf doesn't work on his fear. And so it allows him to do all this manipulation of children. Bonzo doesn't work on his identity as a leader, and and it leads to his downfall. The Formics don't really fight back because they're not thinking about the resilience against this ongoing attack over and over again. Mazer Rackham doesn't really, Ender's the only one really trying to assess, like, wait, is there something wrong in me? There's something going on in me that I need to work on. And I think all of us can do that by the power of Christ. Like we can all work on that.
Yeah. Final thought on what you just said. I think what's interesting too is if we think of the parable of the speck and the plank, that's the power of that image. Is if everyone was more concerned with the plank in their eye, like I tell my students that all the time when we read that parable, that it's not a parable saying like, okay, remember, like check yourself and then you can check someone else. It's no, imagine if this parable was sent to every human being and every human being lived with the mentality, oh, I should take care of this giant 2x4 in my head. And then if everyone's doing that, well, then guess what? There's probably not as many specks to take care of because you're taking care of the problem in you, which should be the most clear problem. The threats of others and the threats in others are going to be shrouded in a whole bunch of nonsense. But if that like second grade wisdom of like worry about yourself is deeply profound in that way, worry about yourself, because if you're being truthful through the power of the Spirit, he will call you out on your stuff.
Yeah.
And that is what will make those impacts that keep going.
There's more to say on all of that. But hopefully that's a good starting point for you as a listener. We're going to wrap up with our theology section. As Christians, it's not just our thoughts, but comparing it to stories that are supposed to communicate truth, where we lean on the Bible. So here are some of the Bible passages that we think are probably good for you to think through as we wrap up this discussion on Ender's Game. Genesis 3, the fall, the way Satan twists the truth and the resulting impact. He tries to make Eve doubt what she knows, and she believes. She starts to doubt who God is and what he says. Galatians 3, it's where Paul starts like, you foolish Galatians, like, what are you, why are you acting like you haven't been, like, what is going on? And it's the impact of our emotional experiences, instead of turning to the core message of the gospel, how we twist or add to the word of God, whether it be in that case circumcision or Jewish law or something else, to the gospel of Christ, like how it can be twisted because of our emotional experience. We do this to protect ourselves. In Ephesians 3, 8-13, the building of a body of people who display beauty, which can go to our soon-to-be spoiler thing in the future. But what does it look like when you're building a body, a coalition of people who display beauty? What that looks like and how that's supposed to display God's wisdom to the world. And Ender does this a little bit with the team he builds. He calls in all these sort of this ragtag group of kids, to work together. And that's something we should also think about. We talked about a lot of negative stuff, but there's also this pulling together of people to be better than the sum of the parts. And then Galatians 6, 1-10, Ender has somebody who bears his burden with him in Valentine and her compassion. And Peter, as his brother, does not have this compassion. And so Galatians 6, 1-10 is just about how we're supposed to treat each other in dealing with sin and not lying to ourselves and what that value is. And so I think that's also something that biblically I think about when I'm going through a movie like this and sit on. So Josh, how about you?
Yeah, I just have one passage to add. So this is 1 Corinthians 12. I mentioned this earlier, specifically verses 12-27. So this is Paul writing to the Corinthians and talking about one body, many parts, that, he's kind of challenging these ideas of identity in a certain way, of like culture and job and all this stuff. And then specifically saying for any part of the body to basically be jealous of another part of the body. Oh, I'm an eye. What do eyes do? I wish I was an ear. Or a hand can't say to the foot, I don't need you, stuff like that. So there's a jealousy component and there's a dismissing value component, which I think is really profound in culture, or Christian culture, that we need, of like, lots of people have lots of different gifts. And sometimes, to your point, Femi, with Ender building a team around him to even do the mission, it takes seeing people beyond what we maybe think that they can offer, or who they are, and bringing them into a team to do something bigger. So that's all I got.
Yeah. All we had time for today. We appreciate your ears. Yeah, please take this and have some conversations. Thanks for the support. Peace.
Peace.
This episode was produced by Josh Erickson, Josh Cook, and Femi Shokoya, and edited by Josh Erickson. Our social media producer is Colton Mefford. We are currently self-supported. You can check out short stories, merch, and highlighted creators at parablearrows.com. You can also find us on Instagram and TikTok at Parable Arrows, or support us on Patreon. Thank you for listening to the Parable Arrows podcast. Think, move in faithfulness, and trust God. Pull back, aim high, let it fly.